The year was 2014. I was just a neophyte in the cult that is comics. I was picking up anything and everything imaginable at that time. Image, DC, Marvel, you name it, I was reading it. Well, okay, maybe not everything, but I was reading quite a bit at that time. Now, admittedly, I've never been a diehard Marvel or DC guy, but for that brief period of time in the mid-2010s, Marvel had me hooked. They were really hitting a stride with titles like Thor, God Butcher, and Superior Spider-Man, to name a few.
Whoa, dude, your book is awesome. But wait, your book is awesome.
And as such, having faith in the work that Marvel had been releasing, I started picking up The Punisher by a team of creators I was unfamiliar with. Nathan Edmondson, and the subject of today's piece, Mitch Gerads. How's it going, everyone? My name is Hunter, and today we're going to be talking about the Eisner Award-winning artist, Mitch Gerads. Something that is rather interesting about his art, his use of reference images. Before we get any further, I do want to preface this by saying my intention with this video is not to create a controversy or make baseless accusations about his art. More so, I just find it to be a really fascinating topic, and as a fledgling comic book artist myself, I'm trying to take a deeper look at understanding the choices and directions that artists I appreciate make in their work, artists like Gerads to be specific. And going further, I'm not here to comment on the quality of the books he's made that we talk about. For me, this isn't about Mr. Miracle good,
Punisher bad.
Really, it's just that I want to talk through this idea that has been popping around in my head about reference imagery as a part of the comics making process, and leave it up to you, the viewer, to decide if you agree with me, if you don't, or if you have different thoughts. So getting back to that Punisher run, from the first panel on the first page, I was blown away. And even to this day, for me, whenever I read anything Punisher related, the 20-issue run that Edmondson and Gerads absolutely crushed is what I hold as the gold standard for the character. Of course, I'm totally biased when I say that because I've probably not read as much Punisher as I should to make claims like that. Anyway, when the book wrapped, I was quite gutted, but as luck would have it, I discovered that Edmondson and Gerads had worked together prior to their team up on the Punisher. This is when I discovered their book The Activity, which had come out just a few years earlier in 2012. I quickly devoured the series, but as I did, I started to notice something with Gerads' art. Some of the characters looked very familiar to me, and I couldn't quite put my finger on why that was or where I knew the character design from. There's one panel that sticks out in my mind when thinking about this. In one of the issues, there's a scene where a character is in a downed helicopter and there's chaos breaking out all around him, the kind of stuff you would have come to expect from a war comic. So in all this chaos, we get a close-up on the pilot in the cockpit as he lets out a line. Upon spending a little more time looking at this panel, it suddenly hit me. The pilot looked awfully like Jeremy Piven. Actually, it looked really similar to Piven's role in Black Hawk Down. After a bit of research, I pulled up the scene that I had thought Gerads used as a reference. When you know it, it was exactly that. The panel and the frame were almost, if not, identical. Naturally, this had me curious. Were there other similar panels in The Punisher, in The Activity, or any of other Gerads' work that I had missed that were also like this? Before we get too far down the rabbit hole on this topic, I want to spend some time talking about who Mitch Gerads is and paint a picture about how he got his start. According to the bio with his art dealer, Essential Sequential, Gerads is an American illustrator who's made a career out of bringing humanity and realism to the superhuman and unreal. Perhaps the most famous of his work at the time of this video is his partnership with writer Tom King, working with him on projects like Mr. Miracle, Batman, Sheriff of Babylon, and their most recent collaboration, Strange Adventures. It should also be noted that this collaboration between Gerads and King has led Gerads to win 2 Eisner Awards for his work, winning Best Penciler Inker in 2018 and 2019. To the best of my research abilities, I was also able to find out that Gerads made a name for himself through a Twitter art group called Comic Twart, which featured some of the top artists of today's comic book industry, including Gerads' future Strange Adventures collaborator, Evan Doc Shaner. This led to numerous one-shots, and eventually we get to The Activity. So when I discovered what I'll call the Jeremy Piven incident, I noticed more and more characters in Gerads' work that had a likeness to well-known actors. Maybe I'm just seeing something that isn't there though. After a quick Google search, I was surprised to learn that I was wrong. This was something that had come up for other people as well, and as I began to sift through lots of fluff articles out there, I found that there was a group of people claiming that Gerads had been actually plagiarizing other artists, using panels and staging that is exactly identical to one another. One website at the time that this was discovered even went as far as showing some panels from a run on a a few other previously released Marvel comics and compared them to panels from Garrett's work on the Punisher. The key word to keep in mind with this article I mentioned is a swipe, meaning a wholesale copy and paste of another artist's work and passing it off as your own. Additionally, this instance in Garrett's work is still just a claim. This has never been substantiated, meaning besides comparing coincidentally similar panels, nothing has ever been, at least to public knowledge and mine, confirmed. However, I will say when I spent more than 2 seconds looking at these panels, unlike most people who probably saw the article did, it became clear to me that perhaps there was something else at work as well. For me, it wasn't so much that the panels, although they do bear a striking resemblance to one another, looked alike, it was that they both looked like a very famous person, Taylor Swift. I mean, come on, tell me that doesn't look like her both times being interpreted by different artists. The point I'm trying to make here is that more often than the reader probably realizes, people are using reference images to create their work, and reference images that may or may not belong to them. And that is really the meat of what I want to talk about today, as it relates to Garrett's work. Using reference isn't some kind of revolutionary idea in art. Lots of people use reference imagery all the time. Artists in the comics world like David Rubin and Sean Murphy might be some of the most well-known users of this method, and they've incorporated it into their work seamlessly. Where it gets murky is where you're sourcing your reference imagery from. This can become important when you think about the monetary value art can bring. A perfect example of this is the Shepard Fairey Hope poster used for Barack Obama's election campaign in 2007. It's a super iconic image, and Fairey made a lot of money off of it. I mean, it's one of the most parodied images I can think of in recent years. It came out that Fairey had swiped the reference image he used for the poster without crediting or paying the photographer who took the image. And yes, he turned it into his own art, but to most people that was seen as a form of plagiarism on Fairey's part. And he definitely paid the price for it. And I don't want to defend his actions here, but I do want to note that Fairey came from a graffiti art background, making a name for himself, utilizing stencils and existing imagery, doing the exact same thing that ultimately got him convicted. So in his world, this sort of thing could be thought of as normal. This whole idea relates similarly to Garrett's art. Bringing it back around to the Jeremy Piven incident, I definitely thought it was funny that Garretts would do that. But at the same time, I didn't really think using a frame from the movie or one small panel was that significant. Over time, I sort of forgot about the whole thing, but was reminded of it when I started reading his other titles like Sheriff of Babylon, Mr. Miracle, and more recently, Strange Adventures, which I will argue has the most use of reference yet in one of Garrett's comics. And what it seems is that most of his imagery comes from Instagram and films. So I want to pose a question. Is Garrett's committing plagiarism in his work, or is his use of reference imagery a tool that helps enable the story to move along, or have a different meaning as a result? Furthermore, is Garrett's in the wrong for using these images, if that is the case? Garrett's is most certainly not relying solely on other people or other artists' imagery for his works. Quite often, he will post his reference images which feature him posing as many a comic book artist has before him, doing weird poses that may or may not end up in his work. And that is definitely a key distinction to make here, and is probably what makes this topic so interesting to me. See, Garrett's isn't typically using imagery that isn't his, but he is seemingly sourcing images that give his characters a likeness to actors and actresses. It makes me think there has to be a reason for this. A perfect example of this is in the character design for Alana and Adam in Strange Adventures. When it comes to Alana, my first reaction was that he had drawn the character to look very similarly to actress Olivia Munn, especially in the face of the character. But how would someone like Garrett's have access to so many different poses of Munn to create a full picture of Alana? Of course she is in movies, so we have that, but more obviously she has a huge following on Instagram. Based on what I can see here, it seems as if Garrett's has used a lot of Munn's Instagram posts to shape the character of Alana. You might think, well, that's just her face, but that is not true. He definitely has taken full poses as well as combining a bunch of different elements of her figure into one image. With all this in mind, I still have to wonder, why is he doing this? Could it be that giving Alana the face of an attractive actress, we understand that this person is extra beautiful? Well, we may never truly find out, but I have a theory as to why, which is definitely something more present in the design of Adam. Relating this back to the character design of Adam, Garretts has used Armie Hammer as his building block here. Now when he did this, Garretts definitely didn't realize that Armie Hammer would be cancelled in the midst of the book's release. How could he have? And seemingly, once this happened to Hammer, Adam's character changed, especially in his face. It was almost as if Gerads was backpedaling to remove any chance that readers might compare the character to Hammer and the accusations against him. But then he began to swing backward towards Hammer, which makes me think he was at this point using this method, reference imagery, for a purpose. Perhaps Gerads decided to make him look like someone we know who is at the midst of the controversy because Strange Adventures deals with a similar sort of topic, the main character being at the center of the controversy. I know it's a big leap to make, and to be quite honest, that is the narrative I want to believe about this whole thing, but it does look a lot like he is just doing this whole reference thing to get the work done quicker. And that's okay, but that has implications. When the artist takes a piece of work that isn't theirs, whether one considers that piece of work art or not, and only slightly alters it to make it their own, is it really their own work? In the case of Gerads, it is undeniable that he is a unique storyteller and artist. When you look at his panel work and my personal favorite of his pieces, Mr. Miracle, he makes very solid choices that have been polished over many years working in comics. His rendering is quite beautiful, which is a process entirely unto his own, and realistically, if you look at his work, you know you're looking at a piece of Mitch Gerads' art. However, by taking even a simple photo from another person and incorporating it into his own art, can we really say that this is solely his artistic vision, regardless of the implications of rights and paying for the usage of the image? For example, not to bring it back around to the Jeremy Piven incident, but that frame Gerads used is technically the artistic choice made by the director of Black Hawk Down, Ridley Scott, and also the cinematographer, Sławomir Idziak. So can we really attribute his side of storytelling choices as his own if this sort of thing is happening? And following this line of thought, with elements like this sprinkled about in a large majority of his seminal work that got him Eisner Awards for being the best penciler inker, it begs to ask the question, is that level of recognition deserved? And going even further, how do we, no pun intended, draw the line if the artist is adapting a previously existing film into a comic using imagery from the film and likenesses of the actors? Are they just as guilty of committing a form of swiping, even if that sort of work is legally approved? At the end of the day, this may seem like I'm ganging up on Mitch Gerads, and sure in some ways it is. But I think what is different here is that despite what I've seen in his work, I still continue to read his books and be interested in them. And more than likely, many of you will be as well. But I think we can still appreciate the works for what they are. Really, the only people who should have an opinion on this that we value are other comic book artists. And to be quite honest, I bet a lot of those same people are using this method, far more than we probably realize, and they have yet to be put up to the level of scrutiny I've seen towards Gerads. Sure, there's a level of blame to be placed on certain people, Gerads being one of them for doing this. But what about the editors who let this slide? The publishers who may have made perhaps way more money than Gerads has? Or what about the Eisner Committee for glorifying artists that do this? Overall, in terms of what to take away and apply to my own comics, instant recognition of a character as a familiar actor or actress definitely has a jarring experience for the reader. It can, as in my case, throw you right out of the story and add a layer of disconnect. You then start to take a preconception into the story, and therefore you're altering the intended reading experience. By that same token, if that is something you want to bring to the table, incorporating likeness into your work can yield a meaning that the story may not have otherwise. So with all this being said, where do you fall on the pendulum? Do you think Gerads is in the wrong? Do you think it shouldn't matter? Or do you think I'm just full of it? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Thanks for checking this video out. My plan with this show is simply to address subjects I find interesting. I want to assure you that this won't just be about comics. I plan on taking a look at the hardcore music scene and film, to name a few. So, if you want to see more from me, subscribe and wait in anticipation for the next upload. Either way, I'll see you down the road.